Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, as a species, the human race is pretty adaptable, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for that, as the recent health pandemic and current crisis that is going on has shown, but we're not alone in that. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and a conversational fashion. And I mean, if you like how we do things around here, I'm assuming you do because you're listening right now, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seeds YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media, as the kids call it. It's the Facebook, the Twitter, and the Instagram, at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. But finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please come by and pay us a visit where it all began, where this movement was birthed out of the universe. That sounds overly dramatic, but it's true. It's called In the Seats, intheseats.ca, where we cover basically the latest and greatest that the moving image has to offer, be it TV, cinema, streaming, film festivals, whatever. It's all good. If we love to write about it and talk about it, we would love it even more if you come and read about it. So please do us a favor and stop on by. On this episode, boy, we are being current today. It's ebb and flow with the boss's workflow, which is me, so, you know, I keep up as best I can, but we're looking at the world broadcast premiere, which is happening tonight on CBC TV and CBC GEM via the nature of things, of an interesting and really fascinating film called A Nature's Big Year. And we had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with writer-director Christine Nielsen. And the film really takes a look at how nature adapted and shifted and changed during the first lockdown, when literally we could not leave our house. And it shows just how there are turtles who are successfully, nesting a lot better on Juno Beach. It shows how there are cities that actually had their decibel levels reduced quite a bit, and show just how nature kind of could rebound and do more for itself. I mean, even from birds just having a different song, and we got to watch a whole bunch of different stories, which were assembled almost all via remote, which to me is a fantastic feat in and of itself. But we talked to Christine about sort of the inspiration for the film, which came together pretty quickly, and just working by remote, and sort of the idea that I think it's important that we pay more attention to what's going on in our world around us from a nature standpoint, because as much as we see the news and people hammering us over the head on we need to do this, we need to do that, and drastic change here and drastic change there, it's like it doesn't take a lot to move the needle if we really put our minds to it. And I think this film is a really beautiful example of that, and I hope you do check it out tonight on CBC or on CBC GEM when it is available. But like I said, this Friday, November 12th at 9 p.m. on CBC, and then on GEM later or simultaneously. Well, definitely later, but I'm not sure if it's simultaneous or not. But definitely check out a fascinating look at the nature around us, and enjoy our talk with Christine, because it's a good one. Obviously, first off, congratulations on the film, but I mean, I'm kind of curious what bore this out, because I've got to imagine this almost felt like it was a pivot mid-COVID, like you were working on something else and then it turned into this.
Interestingly, I was working on something else that then basically had to cease because of the first lockdown, because I was supposed to be filming in Venice and Panama and places that I absolutely could not go when lockdown happened. So I was sitting home bored, like most people, and I started seeing those stories on social media and on TV about, dolphins arriving in the canals of Venice, allegedly because there are no cruise ships, or
Right.
animals taking over streets around the world. And so I just started wondering, as I'm sure a lot of other people do, like how much of this is sort of social media BS and how much of it actually is supported by science. And because I do a lot of science-based shows, I proposed it to Sue Dando at The Nature of Things, and she immediately put it into development. And then we had to, then we had to do it.
Now, I mean,
That's
I guess
what
that
happened.
that leads in the next question. Like, how do you find everybody? Because I mean, there are so many sort of fascinating stories out there, from like the noise levels to the sea turtles. I mean, I was really kind of enthralled by the whole thing, and just in how this sort of reset button that we all had to go through in many ways affected the animal populations as well.
Yep. Well, so it was a tiny little team at the outset. Essentially, it was me and a wonderful associate producer, researcher by the name of Ben Schaub, who is very well connected in the science community. He worked for Daily Planet at Discovery for all the years it was on air. So he was immensely helpful in kind of getting the word out there and contacting scientists around the world to let them know what we were thinking. We were wondering, is this a giant controlled experiment for you? If so, can we follow along? And we got, as you could see, we got great enthusiasm and great access from all kinds of scientists all over the place.
Now, I mean, did you get to be boots on the ground with a lot of this, or did you have to do a lot of it remotely, just in terms of
That's a really good question.
because of what
Oh
was
my
going
goodness.
on?
I'm sure you can imagine trying to produce a show in 11 different locations over the course of COVID. It was a nightmare. I'm not
Yeah.
going to lie. There were several factors. One is we didn't know what the results were going to be. We didn't know when the results would happen. So we had to kind of time everything according to when the scientists had information and news for us. But that often coincided with yet another wave of COVID and yet another wave of travel restrictions, which were all different. And there were different rules in every one of the places we were filming. So it was really difficult. It really was. But we came up with a way, we had to innovate. So for some of the Canadian shoots, I did go myself and direct in the field with my tiny but wonderful little team. Matt DiGirolamo, the cinematographer, and Brian Sheridan, the sound man. But on many of the other shoots, I hired fantastic local people, many of whom I knew from previous projects I've worked on, and either directed by Zoom, sometimes from the trunk of someone's car on their computer. And sometimes I just had to send really, really detailed field notes in advance, because in places like Alberta's Bighorn backcountry, there was no way I could be actually communicating during the shoot. So it was all about prepping before the shoot.
For sure. No, I mean, it goes back to the old adage, it takes a village to make these things. And I mean, I think this is literally a pretty good example of that. I'm kind of curious, like,
It really is. And even though I'm not sort of hankering to do this process again, it really was quite something. I mean, the other thing that came into play is that, in order to, get one's tax credits and all the things that happen to make these projects feasible, none of that was even assured at the start of this project, because I didn't know if I could hire enough Canadians and Ontario people in order to make that happen. So there was also at one stage of the game significant financial risk involved.
now, I mean, I kind of love the parallels, because I mean, obviously the people crews are having to adapt, but they're telling a story about how animals are adapting during this whole time. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, as you're diving into all the material, like, is there anything that surprised you? Is there anything that caught you off guard? Maybe not just about the science, but about maybe the filmmaking process itself.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I think intuitively, we all know that changes in our behavior will somehow affect the natural world. I think we all know that. For me, the big shocker was how quickly so many species adapt when we change our behavior. Like literally, in the case of many bird species, literally overnight, the places that had the strongest lockdowns, the birds flocked to. The ones that were kind of lax about lockdown, the birds stayed away. I mean, that was mind-boggling for me, as it was for the scientists who did that study. Nicola Coper at the University of Manitoba was, she says, I was shocked and amazed by my results, which is not something you hear that often from scientists. So so that was a biggie for me.
Now, and I mean, I think the thing that stood out for me the most was just the one around the decibel level in the city. And that caught me off guard because, I mean, after I watched it, I was even thinking about it just walking around in Toronto. And I'm like, you know what? Toronto actually feels a little quieter. And it's just one of those things where when we're put with this massive change, there will be some sort of shift. And I mean, I'm kind of fascinated as this is out in the universe now. Like, what is your hope for audiences to pull from this? Because I mean, for me, I think it was a question of, as much as the human race feels like it's this intangible, inflexible beast, when we got to do it, we'll do it. You know what I mean? If we have to make a change, we will. And I think this is a really interesting example of that.
Absolutely. I guess my biggest hope with this film is that people will just realize we can make a difference. Like we really can, and it doesn't take very long. It's not like if we make changes, it's going to take decades to see the effects. We'll see the effects right away. And nature could really benefit from that. And especially with all the messages about, what's the big picture issues that are happening to our planet. I think we just need to, one of the scientists says near the end of the show, we're all interconnected. And that includes humans. And I'm hoping this film kind of really bolsters that with viewers.
No, and I think it does that and then some. And I mean, I think that's the power of filmmaking. And I've got to ask, this is a dumb question, but I've got to ask, was there a moment or like a movie moment in your younger life that sort of got you into this business? Like what was sort of the inspiration, the impetus for you to start being a filmmaker and a storyteller?
Well, I grew up deep in the wilderness. It's where my 90-year-old mother still lives, in the mountains between Nakusp and New Denver in the southeastern corner of BC in the West Kootenays. When we moved to that property, there was no electricity. There was no school bus to take us to school. Like it was really remote, and it still is really remote. So growing up, there were, the first week we lived on that property, a grizzly bear came in and ate one of our goats. Like it was pretty right up against nature. So I would say my upbringing in the heart of nature, in the wilderness, really does now inform my work. I spent many years as a journalist for news and current affairs, which was wonderful, but I sort of feel like I've come full circle back to my roots with the type of work I do now.
Okay. All right. Now, and I mean, again, just for me, another pull away from this is just, I mean, like we discussed, sort of the fact that we can move the needle if we, if it's not an impossible thing. And I'm kind of curious because people will look at this and they'll wonder what to do. Like, is there things people can do or should do, or is the conversation at this stage enough?
I think there's sort of the macro and the micro here. So
yeah,
I think we if we all just pay a little bit more attention to what's around us, just pay a little bit more attention to the things that aren't us humans. That's something I would love to see happen. But also individually, like on the separate stories that we feature in this film, there are actually things that can now happen, concrete things. So with the turtle science on Juno Beach in Florida, because they now have numbers to show that nesting success of loggerhead turtles increases quite dramatically when there are no humans on the beach, they now have the numbers to enforce shutdowns of the beach at night during loggerhead nesting season. Like sometimes numbers and hard data can make a big difference in terms of conservation efforts and things actually moving forward. So I'm hoping that all of this science that was happening during this giant controlled experiment of lockdown actually does also have a lot of those micro impacts in various fields.
Well, there can never be enough reminders out there in the world, considering the world we live in now, that the science actually matters. And you know what? Thank you for putting that on the screen, and thank you for a wonderful piece of work, and thank you for the time today. This was fun.
Well, it was great fun, and thank you so much for noticing and for giving it some time.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.